even though the larger companion variables, that is the membership variable or the talk variable, are consistently positive, as you would expect. If you're out talking to various officials in your neighborhood about civic matters, you would certainly think that's going to promote civic participation. If you are connected to your neighbors through a range of voluntary associations, you would expect that it would predict greater or higher levels of civic participation, and it does. But not for church memberships and not for talking to your minister about civic matters. It's very strange.
Sorry, can I pose a
Yeah.
question? Because I'm a little bit confused about, is this an analysis where the unit of analysis is the neighborhood? Or
Yeah.
are individuals?
You're actually looking at neighborhood effects.
So non-religious memberships would mean the average number of memberships
At that
in non-religious organizations that people have on average in that neighborhood.
These are all civic effects. We're characterizing the neighborhood context based on these individual, well, yes, individual responses of survey responses. Is there anything else I want to highlight here? These are all, so all the variables are now in. Oh, I know. Now this is introducing the race of the congregation. So prior to this time, we've been looking at all churches. Again, there's been such a strong claim made in the U.S. context about the civic importance of the black church. We thought, well, is it possible that our results are masking a race of congregation effect? But our presumption was, if it was, that the black church would be positive and the non-black church would be negative. That's not the case. So the non-black church density is positive, though not significant. Black church density is negative, though not significant. But again, those differences are consistent across all the models. So the puzzle just gets deeper and deeper. The black church density and black church are other variables, all again have negative effects, whereas non-black churches positive, though not significant. Don't need to show that. Okay, the last thing I'll show is, okay, then we thought, well, the model here is predicting events in both 2000 and 2002. So more or less in the present. We thought, is it possible that the big civic effect of the black church really was in the era of the civil rights movement? So we had to go back in time. Is it possible that, and some have argued this, that the nature of the black church as an institution has really changed over the last 30, 40 years. And it's not as important in a civic or political sense as it once was. So if we go back to closer to the civil rights era, do we see more positive effects of the black church? Not exactly, and this is tricky because the nonprofit variable, that nonprofit data is not available in 1970. I forget when that data starts, like sometime in the 80s. So we had to create a proxy for nonprofit density. And we think we did a pretty good job, and it behaves the same way. But it doesn't have all the variables that some of these other models have, so it's a much more truncated model. But this is the best we could do. Very simplified model. You'll see in Model 1, which doesn't include the nonprofit proxy, slight positive effect for the density of black churches, positive effect for the density of non-black churches. So again, a stronger effect for non-black than black churches. But when we add the nonprofit variable, neither of the church density measures are significant. In 1970, which was a period of intense political activity in the black community, in the US generally, but in the black community in particular. So we don't even get sort of positive effects in an era where you would certainly expect it. So what's going on? We don't know, actually. But here are some possibilities. One is that the black, and now I'm focusing exclusively on this very surprising finding regarding the black church. The black church was more central to political civic life in the southern United States than in the north. That's almost certainly true, although people have claimed that the black church was important across the country, even if it was more important in the southern United States. Second, the black church was much less central to the political life of the black community at the height of black power, which is around 1970. So we don't have data that, we couldn't go all the way back to the real civil rights era, which is early 60s. So it's possible that the black power era was a particular moment in time in the black community where the black church wasn't playing the same kind of role it did in the earlier civil rights period. Third possibility, and I've actually argued this in print and some others have too, the standard account of the civil rights movement is the black church, was central to the struggle. And it was, but I would argue that while specific congregations, specific churches, and specific ministers played a central role in the civil rights movement, that the black church as an institution remained conservative and generally stayed on the sidelines. So that's not a contradiction. You can argue that particular churches played a central role and still suggest that the overall institution remained fairly conservative. I actually think that's true, so that may be part of what's going on here. And there's one other possibility here, and which makes Chicago not an ideal city to do this research in. In the United States, political machines kind of were very common in the major cities of the East Coast and the Midwest around 1900. I mean, really entrenched patronage systems, rather corrupt political machines. Most of those machines were dismantled by reformers in the so-called progressive period, 1900 to 1920 or so. And there are really essentially no machines left in the United States except Chicago. Chicago is the one city that had a very clear patronage machine in place. And part of what that machine did was reach out and incorporate various kinds of institutions into the machine structure, including churches. Not just black churches, but churches in general. So it actually may have, compromised the political civic independence of churches in Chicago. You follow? So we may not be getting these church effects partly because the machine is powerful and has kind of corrupted or compromised the civic integrity of churches. That's another possibility, but we can't prove it. That said, so we're trying to understand, we're trying to acknowledge there are other possibilities. We actually wind up thinking that these findings are the general findings. Now I'm not talking about the racial effects. The general findings are in fact credible. In other words, Marx may have been right. This doesn't come as a shock in Europe, perhaps. But in the US, I've given this talk 3 times in Europe and everybody goes, yeah, so? I give a talk in the US and people just, that can't be true! Even progressive academics who are not religious can't believe these findings. So there's a real difference between the reception that I get in Europe from doing this and doing this in the US. In any case, in the US, and this may be true in general about religious institutions, but it's definitely true in the United States, there are 2 types of churches. And others have used these terms too. Internally oriented, more spiritually focused, and then externally oriented, civically focused. And there's no question that the majority of churches in the United States are of the internal variety. That is, they focus their members' energies and attention inward to the church. You participate in the church as a community, and it's oriented to, again, religious or spiritual matters. So those kind of churches actually clearly divert energies and attention from civic participation. You follow?
Yeah.
There are a large number, they're the minority, but there's still a fair number of churches on both the right and the left that are more externally or civically oriented. There's just no question about that. And I think that's why there's such disbelief when we report these results in the US, because academics are well aware of this kind of activist church, again, on both the right and the left. But even those kind of more civically oriented churches are still more demanding, internally demanding of their members' energies than most civic organizations. In other words, even the activist churches have church services, they have church committees, they have Sunday school. Their members attend, a lot of those member energies still go internal, okay? Even if they do facilitate some level of external civic engagement. So if you compared other kinds of civic engaging organizations at a neighborhood level which don't make internal demands of their members, churches are an inefficient, even these externally oriented churches are a relatively inefficient form of civic engaging organization, if that makes sense. They're still much more demanding of their members in terms of giving significant time and energy to the internal structure of the church. So in the aggregate, again, the punchline is, I think it actually makes sense. It's easy to see how churches as a class of organizations might contribute to lower rates of civic political participation relative to other kinds of civic, facilitating organizations. So again, Marx, I think, may have had it right all along, even if most folks in the US are disbelieving of that particular interpretation. And I'll stop there and again invite questions or comments.